Hello and welcome to the Tonearm, where we connect you with the people and ideas moving culture forward. I'm your host, Lawrence Purrier. This week, we're putting the Tonearm's needle on trumpeter and composer Dave Douglas. Dave's new album, Transcend, came out in April. It's the second record from Gifts, his band with Rafiq Bhatia, James Brandon Lewis, Tomeka Reid, and Ian Chang. Dave's last several records were openly political. This one turns toward the sacred. Though we explore where that either-or framing falls short, we also talk about painter and sculptor Jack Whitten, why Dave stayed with this ensemble instead of moving on, and whether at 63 he's summing anything up. Before we start, a reminder that we're here because of your support as a listener, by sharing the show, and through the Support Us link at thetonearm.com. Thank you. And now, here's Dave Douglas. I wanted to start by asking you a little bit about some of the thematic shift in the music from some of your recent work that were a little bit more overtly political in their framing and theming. And now we're maybe a little bit more numinous, maybe a push towards the sacred. I'm curious what you're experiencing.
Well, maybe spirituality is also political, Lawrence.
These days, most days. Well, yeah. I mean, so you're playing with the sacred and the profane?
Well, I mean, if you think about the Duke Ellington perspective, his feeling on spirituality is quite complex. I mean, there's a man that lived a full life, had a lot of appetites, wrote so much music, but also managed so much in his life. And what struck me about the sacred concerts is he's getting to the end. It's clear to everyone. He's lost Strayhorn, his right hand. And now he's on his own and he's written all this extraordinary new music and he's chosen to take the theme of spirituality, the spirit inside and outside the church, I would say. And that touched me. I mean, I'm at a certain age myself. You know, you start to think about all the different things you've done and wrapping them up into a statement. I wouldn't say that anything I've done has been not spiritual. Everything I've done has been political, or maybe a better word is social, something to do with how we live together on the planet. You know, going back to the beginning of your question, Lawrence, I feel like it's my responsibility as an artist that each project be different. I don't get in a rut and keep doing the same thing, that I open my eyes and my heart and my spirit to new things, and that every new project is a challenge to find a new way to say what I feel needs to be said in the music. I don't see Transcend in that sense being so different than Alloy, for example, or Four Freedoms, Gifts, Dizzy Atmosphere, and going back further, Soul on Soul, and Freak In, and Witness, and Parallel Worlds, to go back to the very beginning. I sort of feel like, without realizing it early in my career, the task and the challenge that I took on was how to examine the elements in the music and find a new way to work with them, a new output every time.
Yeah.
And so Transcend, I think, to me, it feels like a summing up in the way that the sacred concerts were a summing up for Duke. But I also feel like it's a departure in the sense that all of these musicians are new to this world. Standard jazz practice is not where James, nor Tomeka, nor Rafiq or Ian come from. I love to get the opportunity to write for musicians who speak in different languages and try to find a way to speak to them, but also to get them to speak in a way that they haven't before. I really love it. You know, last month we did a week at the Village Vanguard with the quartet from Transcend, and none of the four of them had ever played there before. And it gave me this feeling like, wow, you know, okay, I'm not saying like, oh, here are these young musicians that I'm introducing to the scene. I don't mean it like that at all. These are established artists who should be playing there. But just, I felt a sense of emotion from bringing them into that sacred space for the first time.
As you might imagine, I speak with a lot of artists here who have recorded at the Village Vanguard or have played there. To a person, they speak about the hollowed room and being very conscious and trying not to be self-conscious about the people that stood on that stage before.
Right.
Do you have to talk about that? Do you have to talk about, like, take a deep breath, it's the Village Vanguard, or is, a stage is a stage? What do you think they experience that as?
I don't think you have to talk about it. We do talk about it, only in the sense of what the experience is. It's astounding. It changes the way you play. Of course, everyone's aware of who's been on that stage and the music that's been made there, but it's also the sound in the room is very special. And the way that you interact with an audience in a room like that is really special. Also, like the people who come down to the Vanguard to hear you. Some amazing people came and were in the room hearing us. And that's really intense for everybody.
Yeah.
Like I said, these are seasoned creative artists who have done a lot of searching and personal research, have played on a lot of stages. So maybe there were some jitters on the first night. Maybe I get them too. And I've been playing there almost 30 years now. That Tuesday night, man, there's nothing like it.
I think the jitters are a sign of respect.
Well, I also have always said the night that I don't feel nervous going on stage is the night that I will know something's wrong and I need to examine that. Like, I should be nervous because I want to be in a position where I'm not sure exactly what's going to happen. I mean, that's what this music really is about and what it invites. Quote unquote, a good composer for improvising musicians, let's say. The right amount to write and the right amount to leave blank. But that's the risk that we live for.
Well, you've already brought up a lot of the themes I was hoping to explore in our talk, and something I wanted to circle back to before leaving it. You talked about the summing up that Ellington was doing with the sacred music and the sacred concerts. That implied very specific things with him, and you alluded to that. He had a life fully lived. Perhaps he had things that he was thinking about that he needed to address and make right spiritually. There's a lot that's implied in what he went through with that music and at the end of his life. You're young and you have a lot of music ahead of you. What does summing up imply in your case? Is this like, do we expect now you turn a corner? Is this an exclamation point, or is it just a way, like a summing up is different for you?
If I knew that, I'd be Nostradamus. I really don't. Like I said, each project is an adventure in itself.
But you're not implying you're done.
No, I feel like it is turning a corner in a certain sense. I turned 63. I went through the pandemic. We're touring less now. I've been running Greenleaf Music for over 20 years. The whole industry is changing again. I feel like it is a transitional period for me. I don't know where that will lead. I did feel like, okay, Transcend, I've got to put everything I've got into this one because this may be it. And then last week, I just recorded a new project that's a song cycle about the great American grifter, Cassie Chadwick, with 8 singers, a full band, and it's really exciting. And there's something I never, and big connections to musical theater.
And the age of grifters, which we
Well, she was the greatest grifter in American history until very recently. And that was going on all along. I've been working on that for over a year, and I always have multiple projects going on. I'm still writing every day. I'm still studying Bach every day and practicing the horn. I feel like the practice means not holding on to anything. We don't know what it means. I'm writing a book about life and music and my own experiences.
Oh.
The more I write, the more I feel like, wow, we really don't know anything, do we? I feel like the practice of music is about finding new things and being comfortable with the uncertainty of not knowing where we're going. When I begin writing a new project, I'm literally at sea. I am lost. And like I said about jitters, if I didn't feel lost, I'd feel like, oh, I know what I'm doing. So therefore, there's something wrong here. Like, this is not a surprise. I think Transcend is a summing up for me, but I'm still working every day. And this will sound like a humble brag, like when they ask you in an interview, what's your least good quality? And I'm really bad at taking vacations. I don't think of it as work, I guess. My mind is just, I'm always reading and studying, and I wouldn't want it any other way. And we lose some great heroes, and their spirits are all around us. Sonny Rollins is everywhere. And it's important not to forget that, we are a part of that continuum. We're listening to Rollins, and we always will be, and he'll always be listening to us wherever he is. Plug into that.
Somebody recently said to me, and it was off mic, so I won't name the person, but it was an author who said they were ambivalent about something they were being encouraged to write. And they finally got themselves talked into it by a publisher. And the pitch was, nobody but you can write this. And when they sat down to start writing it, they said something similar to what you said, which was, no, I don't think I am the one to write this.
Well, maybe that's the exact reason that they are the one to write it.
That's fair enough, right?
Because they don't know.
Yeah.
There's nothing more boring than read somebody who knows everything.
Yeah. And you get a very didactic tone from that too.
Yeah. And they're just going to tell you.
Yeah. So what is it you don't know in the context of writing a book? I mean, because clearly you've seen so many changes to the business, to the opportunities, everything.
How do you cover all that?
Yeah.
It's huge. I have a great publisher who so far hasn't shut me down on anything, has only given me good advice. My current chapter synopsis would make the book about 2,500 pages. So then, just like in music, there's a process of editing, and it's falling to me. Like, bless him, my editor isn't sitting there going, oh, you got to cut this and you got to cut this. But at the same time, is giving me enough rope to realize, oh, wow, I really need to figure out how to say these things. I started out by focusing each sort of area about one of the musical groups that I've been involved with over the years. Like, there's a long section about all the quintets that I've led and the quintets that I work with and why I feel they're so important. What you can say in a quintet that you can't say in any other group, and why this is a format that's appealed to me for so long. And then the groups that I've had, starting with the group with Chris Potter and Uri Kane and James Genus and Clarence Penn, and then subsequently with Donnie McCaslin, and then the group with John Arabigan and Linda O and Rudy Royston and Matt Mitchell, and then current groups. years go by and like I said, I write a little bit every day. So there's a lot of music that's written, that's there, that's documented. I'm really happy it is. I just feel like a book about the creative process and about the life of doing what we do has to find a philosophical way to express what that practice is without giving you an hour by hour, blow by blow story of what you wrote and what you did and where you went. So that's what I'm wrestling with. And it's funny you used the word ambivalent about your friend, because ambivalence was a key word for me in tackling the current version of my introduction, which keeps changing and hopefully, getting better. The ambivalence of having been taught to not be a show off and not be showing off how good I am and not be prideful of one's own skills or strengths. And at the same time, being a trumpet player, the loudest instrument in most bands, who's supposed to be showy, and in an art form where exhibition is part of the practice. I've always been torn by that aspect of things.
It's interesting to hear you speak on that because, in spending time with Transcend and having listened to you a lot over the years, my introduction to you, maybe as like a lot of people years and years ago, was through Masada. It's really interesting that as I was listening to Transcend, I was thinking about whenever I approach a new Dave Douglas album, I don't have that experience of you leaping out of the speaker and grabbing me by the throat and saying, I'm here, I'm here. Like, that is not how I perceive you as a player. I hear you as a leader. I don't hear you as the dominant sound. You might be a dominant voice on any given piece, but you're not the dominant sound. And I think that there's a taste and a restraint and a learning that's expressed in that. You've learned to be that way, or you've grokked that you maybe need to be that way.
Maybe. I mean, ambivalence. I honestly don't know. I've started using the word uncertainty instead of ambivalence because there's a negative connotation with ambivalence.
I love that.
It means, you're not sure.
Yeah.
And I realized, no, I am sure because over many years, I've had to make a million decisions about the music. You realize, oh, okay, I know how to make a decision when a decision has to be made. So it's more like uncertainty at the outset of making a piece. I've never been one to put myself out in front. I'm a soloist and I've been playing trumpet longer than I've been writing music. But as a composer, that's not the challenge I generally put before myself. The challenge that I put before myself is how can I create a unique platform where these 5 musicians can coexist together and make something that didn't exist before.
I think that's a successful endeavor. I think I hear that as a listener. I experience that more often than not in your music.
Mm-hmm.
Can you educate me a little bit? I'm not familiar with Jack Whitten's work. Could you tell me a little bit about your relationship with that work? It's always intriguing to me when, especially music artists, bring in or channel or refract the work of artists in other mediums. And I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit.
Well, that's always been an important thing for me, bringing in literature, poetry, painting, dance, visual arts. I don't think you can separate the poetry of all the various forms of expression. And music is the one that I practice, but the human voice is something that we can universally all understand and that can help us see something that maybe we didn't see before. Last year at the Museum of Modern Art here in New York, there was an enormous retrospective of Jack Whitten, and I wasn't familiar with his work. And I had some friends, one friend who actually works at the museum, and they kept telling me, you need to go see this. This is really important. And I went to see it, and it just blew me away. First of all the different mediums that Whitten worked in throughout his career. Second of all, what was so important to Jack Whitten was his process, how he made his work, like where it came from and all of the technical practices involved in making it, how they grew from a metaphysical vision that only came from him. I was also already working on Transcend, and so it wasn't lost on me that there was a big painting in dedication to Duke Ellington in this exhibit. I was going through like, wow, I'm hearing music. This is amazing. And then suddenly there's this big Duke Ellington painting in the middle of it. My friend, she gave me, it was a couple weeks after I saw her, and I said, I went to the exhibit and it was really powerful for me. She gave me the catalog book, which is this enormous tome, which I would say, if you're interested, it's worth ordering and getting. Not just the plates, but also the essays in it are really, really well done and really interesting. And there's a lot of writing of his. The pieces that most drove me in the music that went into Transcend were these pieces that he called slabs. So he developed a technique where he would put enormous canvases horizontal. He had a way to hold them in his studio. And then he would pour gallons of acrylic paint on the canvases. And then he built these contraptions that would, from above, drive the paint across and drag it. And so he would let certain layers of the paint partially dry and then drag these tools across the surfaces. And so what you get are these blurred images that have a lot of emotion in them, and you feel the movement, but there's also the mystery of how the layers were developed among themselves. And it was something that predated Gerhard Richter. And yet, if you know his work, has a little bit of a similar vibe to it. Whitten used these kinds of tools in a lot of different ways. And so he had a painting called Energy Field. It's a color field, but you can see that there's all this activity moving inside it. It's a blend of colors. That's the blend of all the different colors that went into it. And yet it got arranged somehow through the manipulation of all these tools that he made. So there's no brushes, just this system that he invented and worked with for years. I was touched not only with how those paintings looked, the story of Whitten's life, the milieu that he was in, the fact that it was right on the timeline of the sacred concerts, the way that he was working with those elements of paint struck me as a direct analog to the way that I work with sound with improvising musicians. So I gave myself the challenge of, okay, let me take some raw materials and scatter them together and challenge these people to improvise their own noise, sound, music, if you will, in a way that would create the feel of these slab pieces.
Yeah.
There's two specific pieces on the album. One is called Slabs and the other is called Curious Species. And they deal with this idea of making raw material and throwing it at the band so the band can throw it back. And there's a real feeling of anarchy and creation and destruction and big forces at work. Then when I was ready to produce these pieces and bring them to the band and play them with the band, in this case, I did a couple of advanced rehearsals just to get a sense of what would happen, and then a couple more rehearsals right before the recording. I send Slabs and Curious Species to my band, and I say, well, this is all thinking about Jack Whitten. And each one of them wrote back, oh my God, Jack Whitten, he's been so incredibly influential for me. James Brandon Lewis was like, I've been following Jack Whitten for years. I have all his notebooks. And it was just not what I expected. I was thinking I would be introducing them to Jack Whitten. No, they were all familiar. And so then Rafiq, who's always asking questions, he asks me, process-wise, do these pieces relate to the slabs of Jack Whitten? We went through in musical terms what it was about, and it opened up a whole dialogue for us as a band and a whole way of practicing. My vision of those pieces was that in recording them, we would be using these developer tools like Whitten did, that we would be out of our comfort zones, not quite knowing the result of all of this throwing together of materials. And after the record came out, they all said to me, wow, when I had no idea what that was going to be. It's amazing. And now that I've heard it put together through the processor, now I get it. Now it sounds like a slab to me. It was a deep, long process.
As a composer, what role does process play for you? Do you experiment with systems and processes and prompts or?
All the time.
Yeah. Oh, really? Really?
Absolutely. I think you have to. Donna Lee is a process. Donna Lee, the putative Miles Davis composition from the late 40s. You're asking a musician to learn a specific set of information, and then you're asking them to join this process by which they play through a series of harmonic motions in a particular tempo, in a particular key, in a cyclical fashion that each member of the band needs to learn, and needs to learn different ways of interacting with that grid of information. That's a process. But you can't just keep writing in that, just like that as a process. Every piece has to develop a new language of how do we make this work? What is this? Where is this coming from? What is the strategy by which we improvise together? Just like when you read a new poem, there's a syntax, there's a language, there's a process that you need to understand it as the reader. If you do understand, or at least if you make a small effort to try to understand it, you'll have a deeper, more profound experience of the poem.
Mm. Listening to you articulate that, you're reminding me of a few weeks ago, I spoke with an author and he just put a book out on minimalism. His thesis for the book is that minimalism, it's not about aesthetics. It's that what defines minimalism in music is that you see the composer marking time and playing with time. And as a listener, you're aware of that, as opposed to minimalistic or music that has minimal aesthetics in instrumentation or composition or what have you. But the music we refer to as minimalism is about time and about the playing with time.
Mm.
That came up for me when you were talking about Donna Lee and you talked about process and the changing the process. That's what's interesting to me, because I wonder when a composer relies on the same process or system too often, does the output not vary enough? Did you ever beat a process to death?
Well, first of all, I think that's up to each composer to make that decision. Some composers work with the same system and format year after year after year, and it's thank God.
Yeah, I find that fascinating.
It's the gift. I would say, speaking of minimalism, a composer like Steve Reich has looked at things, the problem of time, the problem of polyrhythm, the problem of development from a lot of different perspectives, but he has a signature voice in his music. So I wouldn't say that he's used the same platform or system year over year. It's a music that develops, and also there's some basic element of the syntax that he's interested in that roots that music in his voice. Within American composed and improvised music, there have been many moments of people introducing new processes and new ways of organizing new systems. I know that for myself, I got to a place where I wasn't really sure what to do with so-called jazz because I felt like everything had been done. I didn't record standards because I felt like they'd been done every which way. I didn't find any new, and over the years, I've done some covers. When I find something unique that I could say, for example, with a Thelonious Monk song or a Igor Stravinsky, or with Ellington or Mary Lou Williams or Joni Mitchell. Stevie Wonder is one of my favorite artists of all time, and I've never been able to find a way into playing his music. When I was going through this issue of, okay, the way that we use melody and harmony and rhythm and form and key and tempo in this music that I'm playing, something's got to give. And I couldn't really find it. And then it was through listening to the music of Booker Little that a dam broke for me, that the two records that he made in 1960 and 61 I felt like, okay, these pieces that he's written for these improvisers, they don't follow that standard format. Different soloists are playing on different areas of the piece. Tempos change in mid-song, much like they do in Charles Mingus's music. Not every exposition of an idea results in solos over the idea. Sometimes there's just an exposition and then the music goes to another place. So all of that opened a door for me into thinking about how could I work creatively with all of these different elements in this music and organize the music differently. So when I say that each project that I do examines the process in a different way, it's that I challenge myself to work with those elements in a new way. What's a way that melody could work that we haven't really thought about? When I met Kenny Wheeler and played with him, he told me the same story about Booker Little. That was what broke the dam for him, and it would have been 68, 69. And then when I interviewed Jamie Branch, the trumpeter, gone too soon, she said the same thing. She said, yeah, it was Booker Little that changed everything for me. And I've had the same conversation with Dave Adewumi and with a lot of other trumpeter composers. Something about what he got to, he scrambled the eggs in a new way, gave us permission to keep scrambling.
In terms of the playing with the elements, composing and then ultimately performing the compositions that you have created without a bass player, like what's that about for you? What are you researching there? What are you exploring?
Well, I wouldn't bring too much to that. I think it's like anything else. There's no trombone either. When I had a quartet with trumpet, sax, bass, and drums, every interview they would say, well, what made you want to have a cordless band? And I'd be like, wow, it would have never occurred to me. The whole idea is you put three notes together and boom, you've got a chord. So I don't know what you're hearing, but, and I think to be fair, what they meant was groups like Ornette Coleman's groups or Jerry Mulligan's group. That is a form like a string quartet or a symphony. But for me, writing for that band was about how do I make harmony without, just with the three moving voices. But I don't think then, losing the bass is any impediment. I mean, in the Gifts Quintet on this record, Transcend, I've got a guitarist who, through the genius of his computing skills, got enough low end to support the whole thing. And then I've got one of the world's great improvising cellists who's also got effects of her own, and she can do octave doubling. And, to be honest, we played a week at the Vanguard and there wasn't a single moment where I thought about, oh, right, there's no bass. I think about it when I'm writing. I think that any limitation is a chance to find something new to write. It's a new challenge. Like if I were to say, okay, I'm only going to write music using a serial system developed from this 112-tone row. And that's going to be the whole thing. Boy, that's a serious set of limitations. And then you sit down and you get to it. I'm writing for improvisers. So my first question is always like, okay, how are me and my big ideas, how are they going to interact on the ground with these musicians who are going to see through your bullshit a mile away?
Oh, so you're the conceptualist, huh? Oh, aren't you, Artie?
Well, I have the good fortune to also be an instrumentalist. So when I get to near the end of the writing process, I print out either the scores or my trumpet parts, and I put them on the music stand and I try to play them as if I'm not the composer. And right away, I can see right through it. I'm like, oh, that's a bunch of bullshit. Oh, you can't do that. Oh, this is wrong. Oh, I need a rest here. Oh, this could be written better. I feel like without being judgy, without being judgmental, you have to be your own critic. You have to be your own analyzer. And so to look at it from both sides, the player and the composer conceptualist, is a crucial part of what we do.
Without belaboring it, it seems invaluable.
It's like a poet who always reads their work out loud before typing it up and printing it out and sending it out to anybody. You need to have that physicality to any form of art. Any procedural decision, how do you make it and then work with it? I feel like that's at the very crux of the way that I look at creating music, whether it's composition or creating music for a band. What sorts of procedural decisions do I want to put before us? And then how do I turn them into real world situations? And how do I make good music out of them? For every project, develop a set of elements and I don't want to say rules, a list of what belongs and what doesn't belong. Let's put it that way.
Conceptual framing?
No, not so much. Like, what are people going to do and what are people not going to do in this? And then writing from there. I'm really influenced by the poet Mary Oliver and her book, A Poetry Handbook, where she breaks down the elements of craft in poetry. She says great poets are not taught, great poets are made. However, we can talk about the craft. It struck me that it was very analogous to the process that I was talking about, looking at melody, harmony, rhythm, form, timbre, dynamics, improvisation, community, structure, articulation. How do I take those, maybe isolate them so I can work on them in a new way and plug them into a new work that makes something new? I felt that Mary Oliver put her finger on a systematic way of looking at that mode of creating that was really helpful. So I teach a course here at the New School called Creating Music Workshop, where it's usually 8 to 10 musician composers and everyone writes for everyone. We have composition prompts every week, and they're all based on some way of looking at the various elements in the music. And we isolate ways of thinking about working with concrete stuff. Then we bring it in and everybody plays it. And it's great because the composers can't be picky and the players can't be picky because everybody's exposed on all sides. You got to play the stuff and you got to present the stuff.
I love talking with jazz and creative music artists who also teach.
Mm-hmm.
People teach for different reasons, right? Some people, it's to make ends meet. Some people, they view it as part of the tradition. Some people are genuinely called to it, and I have no qualitative opinion one way or the other. There's a course called Advanced Ear Training. Just the name of that course, the pairing implies there's some discourse there. And right, I mean, I read that and I think, well, of course, it's two of the most cited compositional greats that this strange little blue floating orb has birthed. Tell me about that pairing.
First of all, I'll just say about teaching, it's a part of the creative work. Sure, it's part of the tradition. Sure, I enjoy being around young musicians. But I also feel like having developed ways of talking about this, and anybody who was in my workshops at Banff around the late 90s would tell you how embarrassing it was. I only knew how to talk about my own records, which I guess was illuminating in some way. This process of talking about the elements and thinking about composing in this more global way grew out of having to try to explain it to somebody. And it's the same for ear training, the practice of musicianship, the practice of hearing accurately, of being sensitive to the music that's going on around you in a very specific way, of knowing what intervals are, knowing how harmony works, knowing what rhythms are and what polyrhythms are, knowing how to both identify and perform those things, I feel like are the basics for anyone playing any kind of music, free improv, Albanian speed metal, you name it. I have a student who, he's a guitar player, he's from Kosovo, and I had him playing some Tiny Bell trio music that I wrote in the 90s with all these odd meters. He was like, oh, sounds like home. He brought in this Albanian death metal band music that was, I couldn't even figure out what's going on. And they're just like, unbelievable. I would have never heard that if I hadn't tried to.
I love that.
I was very happy. We all learned. In ear training, it's about learning how to sing, how to identify sound, how to reproduce sound. Something that I started doing when I was first working at Banff at the Center for the Arts was singing Bach chorales in groups. Whenever I have a group of musicians gathered together, I feel like it's one of the great sacred things that we can do. Each of those Bach chorales, it's like a tiny gem. Everything about the harmony, the fact that the melodies in Bach chorales predate him sometimes by several hundred years. Each harmonization is special, some quite simple, some very complex. The way that he moves between major and minor and different interpretations of meaning and power. The way that the form and the structure work in the chorales is very special. But just as a musician, to be able to sit down and sing that is so important, and I find so often challenging, and something that young musicians that are playing improvised music often don't get to do. I'll hear a tenor player playing Inner Urge by Joe Henderson, and they're just killing. And then they come and they can't sing a major triad in a Bach chorale. And I feel like, okay, there's a disconnect here. You're playing your tenor saxophone and you're playing the most sophisticated, complex, harmonic, melodic motion that there is, Mr. Joe Henderson. And yet, are you really hearing it? So let's sit down and think about, let's really hear what we're doing so that we can get deeper into it, find meaning, find the soil, the nuts and bolts, the ground on which all of this is based. Then I started asking them to sing monk tunes. And so for improvising musicians, a lot of them feel like, oh, I know that one. And then they go to sing rhythming or baya or off minor, well, you needn't. And you realize, wow, this is really a lot going on here. What's happening? So I developed this way of having them learn monk tunes by singing the melody, singing the bass part, and making up one voice in the middle made up of guide tones. So guide tones means mostly thirds and sevenths, sometimes the root or the fifth, but mostly thirds or sevenths, moving by step. And what I found was that I realized that, wow, they're not so different. Monk, they're these short bursts of incredible information, very compact, with very interesting forms, interesting use of melodic information, very specific, not making any grand claims, but just there like a pillar that you can play in 5 million ways and it would still be recognizable as that monk tune. And so I felt like the Bach chorales, you could say the same. These are just distilled gems of masterful music information that in both cases exemplify good, smart, heartfelt, meaningful use of all those elements. And that's what ear training is about.
I always feel self-conscious when I speak with artists too much about their process or the inner workings of how they do what they do. I don't mean to distill it into mere moving parts. So I appreciate you going there with me. Thank you.
Well, there's a lot to it, and I enjoyed talking to you. You ask really good questions. And I have a podcast, so I've interviewed over 100 musicians. And I'm always interested in asking, how do they work on? Where does it come from? Artist to artist, I usually feel like I can get somebody to sort of go, well, this is what I'm thinking about. And I can say, oh, you mean this. But there have been occasions where an artist will be like, no, I don't have a process. What are you talking about? Like, well, when you sit down to write, what do you do? And then I don't do anything. Literally, I've had to press artists. Well, come on, what you're writing, there must be coming from somewhere. And I'm thinking of one person, but I'm not going to name the name. But this person literally pushed back and said, Dave, I'm not. No, I'm against that. I'm against having a process. And I'm like, well, maybe that's your process.
I'm against that. Wow.
Nice try.
There, I've named it for you. Thanks for so much music. Thanks for your time. I will look forward to more music and more time at some point. Be well.
Thank you. You too. Nice to talk to you.
Thank you so much, Dave Douglas, and thank you for tuning into the Tonearm. If you enjoyed this conversation, check out the over 300 episodes available in our free archive at thetonearm.com. While you're there, sign up for our Talk of the Tonearm newsletter, and it's also where you'll find out about Rotations, our weekly radio show. You can also become a paid supporter at the Support Us link. The Tonearm is executive produced and hosted by me, Lawrence Purrier. We're produced and marketed by Michael Donaldson, with editing and sound design by Terry Grant. Our theme music is by Birdie, spelled B-U-R-D-Y. Thanks so much for listening, be safe, and stay in touch.
After listening to this episode, head to thetonearm.com, our online journal covering unexpected music and culture. Right now on the Tonearm, you'll find features on pianist and composer Eliana Glass, Brooklyn art rock band Myra Lee, legendary synthesist Robert Margouleff, Seattle art pop duo Chinese American Bear, and so much more. And while you're there, be sure to subscribe to our email newsletter, Talk of the Tonearm. That's thetonearm.com. The Tonearm, putting a needle on the cultural wax.